Good morning, everybody. Tom Kaczynski here. I believe it's the 15th today of December. Hope everyone's having a great morning. Lord's blessings be upon you. Haven't come on in a while, but I decided to come on this morning because I had some time. I actually was working pretty busily this week, but I hit my 40 hours, so I'm done, so that's okay. And yeah, I'm taking the shot from the bathroom today. One of the funny things, and not that you'll really care, but a lot of the shows over the years I did from the bathroom because when you don't have a lot of heat, you have to keep certain areas warm and others not. And we always kept the pipes warm. So the pipes being in the bathroom and the kitchen, those tended to be the two choices. And bathroom, honestly, usually has better acoustics and it's smaller room, so it stays warmer. So, like many people, we have learned to live with less. And that's one of the things I'll cover in today's show. A bunch of things. We're going to wander all over the place. But for those who don't know, I'm Tom Kaczynski. 15 books or something on Amazon. I don't know. They took one of them down, maybe 14, because I was telling people how to prepare for survive the coronavirus. Maybe I should rewrite that and change that. But Dana's been trying to talk me into doing some more Civil War stuff, and maybe I will write a fiction book of what it would look like now with the movies coming out. The one on Netflix about the EMP one and the Civil War trailer. Of course, the idea that California and Texas would team up is ludicrous, but the idea that a war is coming is not crazy. It's not crazy at all. It actually makes a lot of sense. But let's start with the simple stuff. Just a reminder, if you want to support the program, the Venmo CVC PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739. This is just how I've been doing this for years, so that's fine. And hello to everyone on Twitter, by the way. I'll probably post this there too. So, because some of you like listening, that's fine. What I do is I ramble about different things. I used to do it more on YouTube, but now I just do it for fun and for my friends. I don't expect anything big out of it. But poverty. So, a lot of people who are not used to being poor are poor now. I was reading some interesting graphs, just long term trends. It was talking about rent, and it was talking about how rent now is on average 50% more than the people who own, which is why no one is selling, by the way, because A, no one can afford to buy at these interest rates, but B, no one can afford to give up the interest rates they had before. And so dispossessing people of property is something the banks are going to look to do to get people to spend more capital because they can't spend it directly through. And unless they drop the interest rates to free fall, which they can't because the dollar's failing against the yuan ruble combination, it'd be very hard for them. So, in short, we have a stagnant economy. And so, what they do is that people have cut down all discretionary spending. That's the fun crap for Christmas, which is why you see, full stores with nothing anyone is willing to buy. And, people selectively shopping for their food, their energy, and their other costs. Because a lot of people are newly poor. I mean, if the median income is supposed to be 41,000, I think most people are now falling under that. And with AI coming in, automation to displace people, that's going to start going into the white collar sectors, into suburban and urban areas where maybe people just won't be able to meet their loans. And that's one way to get the properties back. Because you have to think, what have the banks been doing, right? They've been buying properties. In fact, there was a bill in Congress, if I remember right, that was coming forward that basically was trying to make it so that BlackRock et al. Can't buy single family homes, which I think would be a very good thing, but I doubt it'll happen because it would be a very good thing. And I don't expect very good things to come out of Washington. But one thing I do think, and I would encourage people, is that if there are system benefits to be had, a lot of right wing people will tell you don't take those. By all means, take them. You worked for them, you paid for them, your parents paid into them. I mean, and people who don't even live here are going to get them, like get benefits anyway. So you ought to at least get your share and make your life easier so that your responsibilities to yourself, your family, and trying to plan your way out of these things. If you're thinking long term like I am, you're looking about leaving the country. We're probably going to leave early. I should say early summer. So that's kind of our plan. If everything works according, there's some things that have to happen between here and there. A lot of things that need to happen. This is not a small thing that we've been working on for years, and hopefully it works out because I tell you what I see in the midterm, an election that no one can accept either side winning, and people who are ready to fight. I mean, even this morning, I was in a good mood this morning. Some of you will have been tracking the situation in the state of Iowa, where they put up that reprehensible satanic idol, and they had a gentleman, I think Cassidy's his last name, if I remember right, might be Michael Cassidy, something like that, whatever his name was. He's a political guy from Mississippi. He went up there, took the thing, and just tore it down. And he said, "Look, the Lord would want me to do it, and I trust the Iowans will, pardon or release me because it was the right thing to do. The founders would have never set up a satanic idol." And he's right, by the way. Well, maybe he's right. I don't know. Depends how you look at Masonic imagery. Is that really Osiris's, schlong sitting there in the Washington Monument? If you study the history of these things, as Tucker said, it gets weird. It gets real weird real fast. But the idea that someone's willing to stand against degeneracy and debauchery is something it is a movement awaiting leadership, and that people have come to realize. Politicians decry and say the rule of law is what we must follow, but the rule of law has not been followed. It was not followed with habeas corpus, with the people who were held after Jan 6. It's not been held in the hate speech. It only goes one direction when you criticize certain sides. It's not been held in the legal protection against discrimination, where you guys saw the video James O'Keefe put out about IBM and how they're actively just making so white guys can't get jobs. I mean, this is the truth. And this is no surprise or secret to any of you who've been in the system, who have been at the fringe of the system. But what is needed is a resurrection of morality, and the state, having given up its moral imprimatur by not even follow its own laws except selectively to the benefit of certain groups. Look at the Hunger Games Christmas video that just got put out by the Bidens. You're going to see things go the other direction, and you're going to see competing sovereignty, and I don't know if the Iowa government will have the gumption to stand behind this, but I'm sure some states in the South will, and this will just add and increase the division, and that's okay. I mean, this is what's going to happen in the United States. We don't have a common culture, and we don't have a common people. The demography wars are basically over for one reason. That if you look at young people, the country has already been homogenized into a sense where we are not one people anymore. And it's an empire. It's fine. Let's own it. It's a multicultural empire at this point in the United States, based on economic supremacy and military force, and a military that's failing, and economics that are looking increasingly tenuous. You see massive efforts happening behind the scenes to reindustrialize the United States, but even when that happens, it won't provide job support. So what do they need? They need a war that they can lose the right way. One of my favorite animes, Outer Men on the Sky, said that, where a whole bunch of people can die and a whole bunch of things can be built up, but things that are lost are not of existential importance. You can afford to lose the Baltic states or Ukraine in this sort of conflict, and as long as you can come out of it having greater control over your own area, North America, and I'd probably guess from everywhere, Poland, Western Europe, they would be pretty happy with that outcome, and we might be looking at something like that in the medium term play. Is there a global connection between them? Are these factions really fighting? I don't know, but I do know this. I know that the elites are fighting the people, and the elites don't want people to have any say or any ability to stop this. And if you want to fight them, you cannot fight them by their rules. They will beat you by lawfare, and they will beat you by finance. And how else you're going to get around that? That's a question you need to figure. Are you going to appeal to a moral authority? That's certainly, asking God for help is always relevant. Are you going to organize outside of the accepted limits? Historically, that's worked. I was watching an interesting thing. It was with Now Ferguson and what's his name, Jordan Peterson, talking about the German question, why Germany, as the most developed country, went a certain way in the 30s. And it's not something I talk about too much on this channel because it gets you in trouble. But let's be honest, there was one group of people running finance against the people. It's the way it was, and not just in Germany. Actually, more interestingly, more outside of and against Germany, going back to the Balfour Declaration. And then you and then you look at the things. The original Transclics were in 20s Berlin. People see these things. They see things that are an affront to their idea of goodness and justice, and they destroy it because the state starts defending the wicked against the good. And that happens. And by the way, that's not new. That's not new. That happened in ancient Assyria, ancient Babylon, ancient Israel. Every civilization, every people, at some point, success makes people into insufferable bastards. And they behave terribly. They behave obnoxiously. And the United States is certainly deep, deep into that cycle. And has been for a very long time. But they were talking about Germany and, why Germany was exceptional. And the argument that I think is going to win in about 20 years is it wasn't. It was just propagandized by one group who's really effective at it. And the reality of it is that when history is written later in the 21st century, after everyone dies out and the Kvetchen goes away, for a while, I think it will be popular to write histories of coming to interplays between the two tribes that really played a big role in Europe, the Germans and the people who they oppressed, and who oppressed them in turn, by the way, the Morgenthau Plan, and what was planned, or what happened, you hear about the terrible things of, Auschwitz, but you never hear about Dresden or Königsberg, or, there's a whole story here that is uglier, and it's two groups that kind of destroyed one another, and yet they played with one another. Like, you look at the relationships between Jung and Freud, you look at between Herzl and Hitler. It came out of the same Vienna thing. I mean, the Habsburgs still have a lot to answer for, in my opinion. And if you look at these things, but you're not allowed to have nuance. You have to say this is the absolute evil. But the absolute evil of the 20th century, really, if you look at it in terms of killing and in terms of demoralization, was Bolshevism. And as Solzhenitsyn said, no better dystopian author, in his final book, 200 Years Together, he said that the problem with Bolsheviks is they weren't Russians. And that's what you start to realize. It's the same problem with people who run Wall Street finance, who funded them. So it's the people against the banks and the bankers, and you need to recognize who they are, and you need to begin calling out the different things they use as means of division. And eventually a means of unity has to be found. And I do genuinely believe, if there is any hope for success in any sort of a worldly sense before things fall apart, it's going to be because people pick up the cross, go on a crusade, and say, hey, we will no longer accept this in our societies. And you're going to have to realize this will not be a popular movement. This will be a movement of will. If you had 10% of the people willing to do 100% of what gets done, well, then it works. If you're waiting until everyone goes along with it, that's not going to happen. But what you should have learned from COVID, if you're watching this, young, dissident, or otherwise, is 60% of the people will go along with whatever. A third will adopt your cause because it's new, and the other third will go if they think you're winning. And the final third, well, that group usually is where the actual fighting happens. People who have actual ideas, and that's where your leadership will come from and your enemies will come from. And that's the nature of how these political things work themselves out. Now, to be honest with you, 100% transparency, I think it gets worse before it gets better, because I think as a society, we are addicted to technology, and technology exists between each of us. So even if you had a good idea, unless you're sitting there meeting in a cabin somewhere, where there's no technology, for many, many miles, you have a very hard time putting things together. But on the other hand, crises of competence are real, and who knows, maybe if this cyber attack, that they've been forecasting so heavily happens, maybe people will say, look, we're not going to give you charge afterwards, because it's not hard to predict where this is going to go. At some point, a terrible cyber attack happens that takes down elements of the financial system, maybe the food stamp system. They know that would make people panic. And they say, to let this never happen again, we're going to have a public ID, we're going to have a digital ID, it'll be biometric, and you use this, and we will just give you money directly. So that way they'll say they're not taking care of one versus other, and you'll have to spend it within this amount of time. And it will create either a two-tiered currency or something like CBDCs. And this is happening in other places around the world. This is nothing new. China has been trying this, but other countries like Australia are starting to get into the mix. When this happens, this is when they will destroy the idea that money is a store of value. And if money isn't a store of value, then you have no ability to gain access to capital beyond what you actually have, and you will find that the perpetual overclass, what's the phrase they use? The dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the fancy word they used to use back then. It's the way of saying the people in charge, right? That will continue, and that will resume. So I think that's what you will see in the midterm happen if you don't get out of the way. And in terms of getting out of the way, what can you really do? Well, to be honest, you got two choices. You really got two choices. You fight or you flee. I'm choosing to flee, and I've told you why. Because I don't think most people are going to want what's necessary, and honestly, I'm not up for the bloodletting that's going to be on the other side of that. But if you're going to fight, and you're young, and you got family, or you got reasons you want to stay, okay, then own it, but start coming to terms with your own thinking. That's what I'm saying. If you're willing to do that, okay, I gotta respect that. I don't think it's the right decision, but I'm also old, I have a sick wife, I'm tired, and these sorts of fights, I just want to get out of the way. And say what went wrong, because I don't think the problem is, once the die is cast and you really start to take down of America, no one can know what's going to happen. And I think a lot of really smart people on all sides, establishment hacks and dissidents, have sat over these last decades, and it's been decades, saying, this is going such a bad direction, but if we did this, it would only make it worse, because the problem is the people. The ideas that have been indoctrinated, the habits that have been learned. There's a lot of people in this country who just don't have a whole lot of efficacy. And it's not one specific group. Certain groups have a sense of entitlement that makes them particularly annoying. But in general, Americans are not a very adept people outside of a very specialized system that we have all become accustomed to. And that thing was whirring like a machine until about 2020, when it was torn down to have the COVID breakdown. Which was incredibly short-sighted from the economic perspective because the habits of the supply chains have broken and there isn't enough time to put them back together again, and governments are panicking and looking for wars as a means to get out of it. And the leadership who are at the top, who are the most insulated from the consequences of these things, don't realize how much the world has changed beneath them. I mean, we're not too far from the heads on pikes part of history, and that's going to be an ugly part. But you need to be aware of these things coming, and I do think actually after the election that will happen eventually, and whichever side wins, because both sides, rightly, I think, have concluded that one has to win. Or there has to be a forced division. But for a forced division, someone has to take the throne, and people are getting past the point of paying attention to pretenses. And I think that will occur as you see that, at some point, a major American asset will be lost, and a lot of people will shrug because the interest of our military, whatever well of patriotism existed, has been destroyed by 20 years in the deserts. And that's fine. Respect to the people who served, nothing against them. And if you had better leadership with better goals, maybe it wouldn't have been that way. Or if you had been sincere about a reconstruction effort, but you weren't. It was a cash grab, and it was a power grab. And the military industrial complex has a lot more power and a lot more cash. And ultimately, what will happen is a war against capital will be necessary, or capital will win the war against you. And I sound like a socialist, but when I say capital, I don't just mean money. I mean the idea that you won't own any assets. It's really a fight over land, which a lot of wars really come down to. Who owns the real assets? And if you allow the collateralization debt's going to cause, eventually all those mortgages will be called out. People won't make enough money to cover them, and the banks will own the assets. And they'll say, well, we'll make a system that's fair. But whoever makes the system, whoever makes the rules of the game, usually wins the game. And that's the problem with this. You can't let them decide the rules of the game. So these are the sort of things that I think about a little bit. And, looking at what's happening around the world, looking at Ukraine slowly moving towards collapse. Zelensky doesn't have anyone left. They're sending pregnant women to the front lines. It's crazy. You'd think a revolt would be coming there, but America's paying the bills. So for the moment, it's holding out, but not too much longer. You see that Sweden is under the U.S. protection umbrella, which is interesting. So NATO's moving forward, even if Turkey's not doing their part, because they don't trust one another, and nor should they. And you look at a lot of people going paying homage to Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia, whatnot. Don't know. Argentina news. I always keep track of that. Argentina has increased, or I should say devalued the peso from, I think it was 385 to 800. The street value is about 1,000. That makes sense. And they cut their ministries by half. Not a big fan of Milei's foreign policy inclinations, to put it that way. But been talking to my friends down there, and they're holding strong so far. I'm trying to restart that economy. And I do think, as a general rule, I'm suggesting looking at going to the South America, Southern Hemisphere, might not be a terrible idea for you to consider if you have some assets or some, a sense of adventure, get out of the way, because culturally the societies are a lot less broken. And economically and politically, they're a nightmare. But culture is kind of what can carry you through bad times. Argentina survived 25 years through bad times. They're going to be okay. America without the internet, Big Macs, and a dollar that buys things. And not only that, but people are mad. People have had to suck it up, and they've kind of looked the other way. And you can get over being mad if good things happen, right? This is like basic human psychology. If someone does something crappy to you, but then they do a couple nice things, eventually you can forgive and forget. But if they just keep abusing you, eventually it's like the kid who snaps, It's like falling down. You're not supposed to like the lead character in Falling Down, but the Michael Douglas character, it's perfect. It's exactly, he's had enough. And I think that's where we are. We've had enough. And they can silence you, and they can shut you down, and they can criminalize people who speak the obvious. That's fine. Although even that blockade's starting to break, and whether it's the world's biggest honeypot or not doesn't really matter. The reality is actions are going to have reactions, and we can see where these things are evolving. And so what I would say to you is just be smart, be prepared, figure out what you're going to do. And, I will say if you're going to get political, we're going to have something like the 30 Years' War, where you have the religion of secular technology, like I talked about in Beyond the Beast system, that, people really aren't ready to consider yet because we're still in the left-right paradigm. versus the religion of what? Religious traditionalism, maybe. That might be it. The major churches won't do it. Catholicism won't do it, but that's why they're scared to death of Christian nationalism. And not that I trust the leaders who are coming forward in that necessarily, but it's an impulse that's inherent to the time. The idea that if morality is not going to be protected by the state, and in fact, it's actively interrupted because really government's getting into schools was a huge mistake. I will say this, and this is my actual belief, the church should have kept control of schooling. And you can look at how this whole thing really started and go back to the Schofield Bible, go back to the reformers and the populist movement of the early 20th century, and you can see this is really where it started to go down. They had to take God out of society before they could put government in its place. And those fights are not well enough understood, and people need to look at it, but people don't know theology. People don't even know the Bible. They know what their preacher teaches them, maybe, or they know what the media says it said. But Christianity is far more complex than people think. But those are things that we're going to learn, and you might see militant orders emerge. I think that today was an interesting day. The fact that someone went and tore an idol down, which was something that people said, there's a higher law. And that fight, look for that to grow. That's the takeaway from today and what I'm interested in. And good on him, by the way. If I was in a different position in my life, I might have thought about doing the same damn thing. Because you know what? The Lord will certainly bless those who speak up for him. And to look the other way of evil and be an accessory to it is something, it's a bad look for everyone. So I just pray that the Lord put a blessing on each of your lives today. Hopefully an understanding that you've missed. Not that I can give, but that he can give. And I just want to say, Lord's blessings be upon you all. If you want to support me a little bit, Venmo, CVC, PRV. Good time to go on Amazon. Both The Coming Civil War and Incoming, the sort of follow-up I wrote, were useful. And ideas you have of things you'd like to read about. Keep in mind, you have to be sort of mindful of what you can say. We're not at a point where you can just say the most obvious things, but I mean, I am tempted to go back to fiction and to share some ideas there. So certainly something worth looking at. All right. God bless. You guys have a great one. Tom Kaczynski out.